I don't know with the presentation. Virginia Beach City Workers Collective Bargaining Rights. Collective bargaining is a process by which an employee and a union neglect the terms and conditions of employment, wages, hours, working conditions, grievance procedures, and examples of those could be between a school board and a teachers union, between a city council and a union representing the city sanitation workers. Next slide, please. Ban on collective bargaining is a vestige of structural racism and sexism. Right to work for less laws and ban on collective bargaining rights passed in Jim Crow era when Black folks had no right to vote. As Martin Luther King said, sorry. In our glorious fight for civil rights, we must guard against being fooled by false slogans as right to work. It provides no rights and no works. Its purpose is to destroy labor unions and the freedom of collective bargaining. We demand this fraud to be stopped. Yes, we do. Next slide. All right. Black workers and women overrepresent in city workers' jobs in Virginia. If you would go to, according to Black workers are more likely to work in local government than Hispanics and other nationality workers. Black workers overrepresent despite being less likely to have a bachelor's or advanced degree required for many public sector jobs. The Economic Policy Institute reported unions can reduce public sector pay gap, and that was noted back in June of 2021. The next slide will show you the difference in the private sector where there isn't, where there is no collective bargaining. I think, let me make sure I have the right one.
Yeah, this is just overall breakdown for collective bargaining and non-collective bargaining overall across the country. Yeah.
Okay. As you can see, it's a big difference. All right. Next slide.
I think just as one piece, that when, part of the reason we wanted to start with this background around that Black workers and women are overrepresented, that when we talk about any policy that impacts city workers, we're just emphasizing that it disproportionately impacts Black and women workers. So the ban on collective bargaining, it came about, as Valeria mentioned, in the era when the civil rights movement was fighting for the right to vote, was fighting for the basic dignity and humanity of Black people in this country. And a lot of the local governments, some of the original labor laws that were passed, the Wagner Act, which is known as the National Labor Relations Act, which set the first ever national framework for collective bargaining in 1947. It explicitly excluded the federal bill explicitly excluded farm workers and domestic workers, and left government workers up to the state and city governments. And at that time, of course, farm workers and domestic workers were all Black workers, right? Mostly Black workers, and again, disproportionately, even were public sector workers' jobs were as well. And so this was a move, and it was later, about 20 years later, still before there was really, and North Carolina was in 1950 and Virginia was the early 60s, when they actually went ahead and banned collective bargaining. And actually Virginia and North Carolina and South Carolina are the only states in the entire country which made the step, the proactive state, to make collective bargaining for public workers illegal. Again, responding to the gains of the civil rights movement and not wanting Black workers in the public sector to have any power over policies, over public revenues, and leaving that into the hands of the white power elite. And so on this slide, as you can see, this is very recent data from the Economic Policy Institute that, you see here in Virginia, whereas 16% of the private sector are Black workers, 19% of local government is Black workers. And you talk about women, where 44% of the private sector is women, 63% of local government is women, and that's largely having to do with teachers and human services nurses like Valeria, which are vastly overwhelmingly women. So anyway, just a little bit on that. But here you go, Valeria. There you go.
Thank you. The Virginia Beach city departments are highly segregated, either Black jobs or white jobs or women jobs. As you can see, waste management has 97% Blacks, but only 2 are women. The sewer collection has 83% Black employees and no women. Water distribution has 70% Black, no women. The general maintenance has 86% white, no women. Street maintenance, 73% Black, and only 3 are women. Human services, 91% Black. That would be where I'm working.
So yeah, so I think what we're trying to say here is that, like, if there isn't institutional racism and sexism, then why, when you look at all these departments, are they so overwhelmingly clearly organized based on race and gender, right? It's either like a Black man's job or a white man's job or a white woman's job. And so, clearly there's a hiring segregation and relegation that happens at the point of hire, which is a big question for the city about why this exists. And just looking at the objective reality of who these workers are and who gets placed there, it speaks to the institutional, race and gender bias that is in the city of Virginia Beach employment today.
City workers earn less than private sector, negative 14.1%. Local government workers earning are lower than that of a similar private sector workers. These numbers are worse for non-union states, 29.9% lower than that.
So again, when you talk about that Black people and women are overrepresented in local government, and you talk about the pay gap of being almost 30%, that means that, again, Black workers and women are disproportionately impacted by these lower wages compared to the same industry in the private sector. 29.9% lower pay here in Virginia.
We have Mr. Hill, who works for the Utility and Manic Aid. He's a worker living in Virginia Beach. It's a mixed match from what he says. With our salary starting off so low, you can't even afford a single family house. Even with a CDL license starting at base salary just over $11 and some change. It is ridiculous. I have a family, he has a family of 5, and his biggest concern, like many of ours, is buying a house. As he said, he would like to put his family in a house, but he cannot afford one on those wages. Right here, you have a utility mechanic aide, what he would work in the city of Virginia Beach, and other cities compared, that's pretty much making the same amount as, or I would say the cost of living is the same. As you can see, Virginia, the city of Virginia Beach is far behind. We're like 6,000. We're just below the average of 6,000 compared to other places. I guess our salary is really way behind. It is a shame, I think, the city to be starting someone out that low.
Yeah, and like Valeria said, our union research department put together a whole comprehensive report about most of the major job titles. And we're just going to show a couple examples in this presentation. And what we looked at was looking at the Southeast. So not going to the Northeast or the West or the Midwest, but looking at the Southeast here, cities that generally had a similar size and a similar cost of living comparable to Virginia Beach. We looked at there was about 7 or 8 cities, and we looked at the similar pay bands. So like for utility mechanic aid, we found similar job titles in these 4 other cities, and looking at all the cities, Virginia Beach is clearly the lowest, and on average, like Valeria said, $6,200 below all those other cities of a similar size and cost of living.
Mr. Ronald Bacot, he says his wife has to get 3 jobs and had to get a second job just to live somewhere comfortable in a good neighborhood. The way she normally works, we barely see each other. Upper management is still as unfair to us. As a mechanic 1, I only bring home like $1,000, $1,200 every 2 weeks. Wages are so low that I have to get lots of overtime. Gets exhausted and tired of working all weekend. He already caught the virus because he's out there every day exposed. As he says, we need to get better wages and we need collective bargaining. Once again, showing the salaries compared to other states in the same region as Dante say, and same cost of living. We're still averaging way below 17,000 of this one, as you can see.
And this is the max salary. And just one thing to note, that nobody ever reaches the max salary in Virginia Beach. And some of these other cities where there is collective bargaining, like in Miami and we're in Durham and Raleigh, we have a union, but there is no collective bargaining. Sometimes you can reach the top, but in Virginia Beach, it's like people don't even reach the midpoint after 10, 15 years. They're stuck at the bottom. But this just for the purpose of the discussion is just looking at the maximum. Even if you did reach that maximum, which people aren't doing in Virginia Beach, the maximum salary for utility mechanic aid would be this, as you see on the screen.
All right. In Virginia Beach, city workers over 1,142. Virginia Beach city workers earn less than $15 per hour.
You know, as I'm sure you all have seen, you know, our movement has really established the standard, you know, of $15 an hour being a very, very, very basic minimum wage. And in a city like Virginia Beach, 15 bucks an hour, you know, that's 31,200. It's still not nearly enough. You know, we actually met with City Council member Jessica Abbott, and she said an average worker would need to earn $66,000 a year to be able to own a home in Virginia Beach. And again, this is and 15, which is there's 1,142 less than that. 15,000 is half of that 66, right? So these people are earning less than half of what it would take to own a home, right? A majority of these are Parks and Rec employees that are groundskeepers, that are about 700 or so of these are groundskeepers, are the people that do, there's a bunch of after school daycare programs, there's lifeguards. A lot of these are full-time year-round jobs. So a portion of them are just summer jobs, but they are full-time jobs for people. But even if you look at public works, you know, there's 100 workers that are street mechanics and that are street maintenance workers that repair the streets, that are laborers on the back of a solid waste truck. You got utilities guys that do water meters and that do sewer collection, that have CDL. All these folks have CDL, like in public works and public utilities you see on here, over 150. These folks have CDLA licenses, right? So operate heavy equipment, skilled people, making less than 15 bucks an hour. Many of them 12 and 13 bucks an hour. So it's really just, you know, I don't know if you all saw it was a really interesting article I read in the paper today. The CEO of the Federal Reserve, who was based in Richmond, I forget the guy's name, was saying that, you know, because 15 bucks an hour, he was even acknowledging is becoming a standard, what's acceptable as a bare minimum wage, that workers, like there's In sewer collection, for instance, where these guys are making 12 bucks an hour, even the CDLA, 11 bucks an hour, there are 22 vacancies right now out of about 70 positions. So these guys are filling in for each other. And I say guys because they're entirely all men. And so you have all these huge vacancies, and the city, can't fill these positions, which means they're working more and more longer hours. And the city can't fill these positions. And even the Federal Reserve CEO is saying people aren't going to go back to work making 11 bucks. If they're seeing that 15, if they can get 15 at Walmart or Dunkin' Donuts, why would they get a CDLA to get paid 11 bucks with the city, right? It's just really something the city needs to reckon with and really raise the wages. Again, these departments, these job titles are disproportionate. This is even, the lower you go down the pay scale, the more disproportionately Black. Almost all these positions would be, that I mentioned, in public works and public utilities, groundskeepers, all these, I would dare say 85, 90% Black workers, right, making these low wages.
Starting in May 2021, local government bodies of Virginia can volunteer agree to bargain with unionized workers, though this falls short of duty to bargain without collective bargaining. So thinking is now we can at least start bargaining, but without collective bargaining, it's still
Yeah, and it just like to point to this picture, this was an action, a press conference, and a speak out at City Council that our union organized on November 17th, after we had collected a majority of the workers in public works and public utilities that signed on to a petition calling for increased wages, calling for safety, for more of a voice on the job and collective bargaining. This was a press conference we had at City Council that was on the front page of the Virginia Pilot for folks that want to look it up on November 17th, and we can send you that article. But yeah, but this is an incredible opportunity, the first time now in history that these workers are allowed collective bargaining, finally overturning these vestiges of Jim Crow and putting the onus on City Council, because the way that the new state law works is that it's enabling legislation, it enables them, but they have to still take a vote as a body to allow collective bargaining. This has happened in a few other cities. First, it was in Portsmouth, then in Loudoun County, Fairfax counties have voted to do so. And we're really hoping you all will help us to make that possible here in Virginia Beach.
okay. Pay disparity is still high in Virginia because no collective bargaining. As you remember from Hill, the utility mechanic only making $11 an hour. Pay disparity for Black workers between private sector and local government is 70.3% outside Virginia versus 18.6% in Virginia. Very unfair.
Yeah, this is specifically for Black workers. If you compare a Black worker in the private sector versus a Black worker in local government, that's what this number is. According to these numbers are all from the Economic Policy Institute report from June 21.
Black and lieutenant workers especially benefit from public sector collective bargaining. As you can see, the difference between the local government and the private sector earnings clearly shows Blacks and Hispanics actually having clearly winning, I would say, in this, as you can see, where it's permitted collective bargaining, our earnings are much better compared to where it's banned.
Yeah, the negative means that that actually the local government, you're earning 10.7% less than in private earnings, whereas I'm looking at Black workers where it's banned, and where it's required, local government workers actually make 6.6% more than private sector. For Latinx, Hispanic workers, they make 12.3% less where it's banned, and make 9.4% more when local government allows collective bargaining compared to private sector earnings. whereas you see for white and Asian American Pacific Islanders, the difference is less drastic.
Employees benefit from local government workers in Virginia are less generous than those in other parts of the United States. As you see, retiree benefits as shows 7.1% versus 16.3% in other states. United Nations rule that ban on collective bargaining in public sector is a violation of workers' human rights. As you can see, according to the International Committee on Labor Rights, there's a significant violation of international recognized labor standards in the public sector, which was strongly correlated to the absence of collective bargaining rights. And those were race and gender-based discrimination in hiring, promotion, pay, the exercise of discipline and termination. Without collective bargaining process, employees were at the mercy of prejudice and preference of supervisors. Another thing that was shown, systematic breaches of occupational health and safety norms. As you heard the testimony from workers, basic health and safety norms were neglected in workplaces. As you heard the guy, Mr. Hill, he said he caught COVID by being out and about. I know when we first heard of COVID, they didn't even know what to do. We had to tell them, well, remember, it's mandatory that we wear a mask. They were like, well, at first they didn't even want to give us masks. I understand part of some employees' concerns now that we now might be hitting a second wave, and we're still not giving any directions on what to do. Another violation that was noted was arbitrary personal policies. I guess that was when it came to discipline of a worker. Many Afro-American and women feel that they are not being treated equally, especially if you are the new person in that department. I guess. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and like Valeria says, I mean, when we say the United Nations ruled, just so you all know, we, the UE, our union, based on the ban of collective bargaining in Virginia and North Carolina, we appealed in 2006 to the United Nations International Labor Organization. And this International Labor Rights Committee helped facilitate that she referred to. And we actually, there was jurors from South Africa, from Nigeria, Sweden, Mexico, Japan, all over the world that came in to North Carolina and Virginia and met with public workers. We had hearings, they took testimony, and they issued a report in 2007 that you can actually look up on the United Nations International Labor Organization website, that that they said that this ban on collective bargaining was a fundamental violation of fundamental human rights, specifically in Virginia and North Carolina, but also that it was inherently discriminatory to women and to Black workers. And it created these conditions that Valeria outlined. These are straight from the report, these conditions that she's speaking of. And so this was an actual international agency, right? And a couple years later, we actually brought this to under the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, y'all may know, which is the agreement that the government bargains with Canada and Mexico over free trade of products. There is a North American agreement on labor cooperation. So there's certain labor standards now that are required under NAFTA to allow for there to be free flow of goods and free trade And in fact, what we found was that collective bargaining was one of those fundamental principles. And so by Virginia and North Carolina banning collective bargaining, technically, Mexico and Canada should have not had free trade with Virginia, right? According to their own labor cooperation agreement, but there was no enforcement mechanism for either of these, the United Nations ILO ruling or the NALP ruling. And so we brought them to Obama when he was newly elected with Department of Labor Secretary Hilda Solis. We brought workers to meet with them, and they said, sorry, y'all, this is a states' rights issue. That's what they said about slavery, right? This is a states' rights issue. He literally said that to us, and it's up to the state legislatures. We can't do anything, and the local governments, we can't do anything about it. So we have could continue to build a local movement in across Virginia, North Carolina, even West Virginia, organizing public workers, state workers, city workers to speak out, to have power, to build a movement, to link with groups like you all, Dismantling Racism, faith and civil rights groups, to raise us up, to push the state legislatures. And thank goodness our movement was powerful enough to win this incredible new law in Virginia, and now trying to take advantage of that to make it real for local government workers here in Virginia Beach with your help.
Dante, can I hold you right there? This is Teresa. Jamal, for some reason, has not been able to get his audio working, and you're the host. So it keeps telling him that you have to let him in again. Can you readmit him? Because this is really critical information for him to have as a human rights commissioner. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just think that this is a powerful presentation, and I don't want him to miss out. Do you see where he's trying to be readmitted? And
yeah, I just let him back in. Yeah, sorry for that. Yeah,
no, that's okay. And I hated to break your stride. All of that. I mean, this is an excellent presentation. I think we're all just kind of trying to grasp it all. But I think that it's especially crucial we understand the link to the civil rights movement. I mean, this is why Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, working on worker rights, and the human rights implications from an international level really do make it something that people like Jamal and I need to fight for. So Jamal, are you in and hearing by now? I mean, I don't know what to do with him because I know he's been trying all this time and he keeps texting me. And,
well, we have recorded this, so I'll send him a link.
Okay, that would be great. So I'll let him know that it's being recorded, and I guess that was okay with everybody. Jimmy just did that, which is fine with us. And yeah, just go ahead and continue. Thank you.
Yeah, so we're just on this last slide here.
The last slide is a so-called right to work will rob us of our civil rights and job rights. That was by the great man, Martin Luther King Jr. And I would just like to thank everybody for giving me this opportunity and for listening on behalf of my other brothers and sisters who couldn't make it today. Thank you so much. And this is so important to us. I can't tell you how much it means to us. Thank you.
And just speaking to the point, thank you, Valeria, for sharing your experience with us as a city worker. You know, what Teresa raised, you know, the reason we have Dr. King on here is not just an abstract thing. You know, Dr. King in the last stages of his life, he talked about how, you know, the economic evils, you can't separate the economic evils from the, you know, discrimination, the racial discrimination, and particularly in the South, where the two are so intimately linked with the history of chattel slavery and Jim Crow and Black codes. And he was, as you all know, on April 4th of 1968, standing with city workers, right? Literally standing with city workers, fighting for collective bargaining to build a union, because they knew to become a man. They said, I want dignity. I want to be treated as a man. To be treated as a man, I need a voice over my wages, my working conditions. I need to have a union, have collective bargaining. And they literally stood up to tanks to march to become a man, to build a union. He was, of course, assassinated on April 4th, 1968, you know, and setting off a wave of public sector workers organizing across the South. And we're part of that legacy. Literally here, more than 50 years later, literally, we're still city workers, Black majority city are literally fighting for the same rights Dr. King was literally fighting for when he was literally assassinated. So we just want to leave y'all with that quote and his legacy, and hope y'all will support us. And we're definitely open to more questions, and we definitely have some concrete things that y'all can do to help us. But yeah, thank you for your time.
Dante,